All right, I am Johnny Nomega, and this is my free online course talking about everything you need to know about the music business. The majority of the music business is the actual business side, not just music. So we're going to jump in with today's video on recording in a professional studio versus your home studio. Let's go. Okay, so today we're going to go over pluses and minuses, pros and cons to recording in a professional studio versus a home studio. I give 5 pros to each and a few cons. Let's jump right in. Number 1 for recording in a professional studio is the space. You have treated walls, treated floors, treated ceilings. It is a great experience. I know that in our studio in Virginia, when I had my studio in Virginia before I moved it down here to the south, deeper into the south, I had an A&B room, that was a lobby. It was a great space. It was a great space to record, big open spaces if you're trying to record drums, just a great space. So the number 1 pro is just the physical space. The space is treated, the vocal booths are treated to make you, to not just capture the sound, but also make you sound amazing. Number 2 is the equipment, guitars, amps, drums already set up if you don't want to bring your own drum, just the physical equipment you get to record on. There are some studios with full orchestra equipment, basses, cellos, oboes. So being able to go into those spaces, number 1 pro, and then 2, have access to their musical equipment, which is amazing. So that's number 2. Number 3 for recording in a professional studio is the actual studio gear, the preamps, compressors, microphones. For those that don't have a $30,000 Sony mic CMG or a $5,000 Norman or a Telefunken 251, to be able to go in and record in these spaces with this gear, it's pretty awesome. It's really, really awesome to be able to go in and record with that gear for your project, to go in with a small budget, but have access to everything that the large stars and the big stars have access to. 4, I kind of broke up into a 4A and a 4B. So number 4 for recording in a professional studio, the pro, is the experience. So 1, the experience in recording. So you're going to have an engineer normally that has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years possible of experience, and that is awesome. That's why I always advise people not to mix their own records. Even if you record at home, don't mix your record. Let someone with 30, 40 years of mixing record it. You may be able to capture it at home, but allow someone that can, unless you're really great and really confident in mixing, let a professional mix it, because they can make your home recording sound like a big professional recording, even though you recorded at home. So 4A is experience in actually capturing. And then I kind of jumped into 4B, which is experience in mixing and mastering. You get someone, like a CLA or a Jakir King, one of those guys to be able to mix your music, and a mastering professional to master your music. Even if you captured it, for the low on your home, Focusrite solo, and, Rode NT1A microphone, that's totally fine. As long as you got a good, clean recording. A lot of times these guys can go in and make your minimal sound maximal, right? Make it sound amazing. Is maximal a word? Not sure, but I used it. Webster, go ahead and add that in there. Okay. Cons, a couple of cons for recording in a professional studio. 1 is availability of studio time. So I've produced thousands and thousands of records. I always use my own studio, but sometimes I travel, I use other people's studios. And I've found situations where I've booked time and, you have to push it later or push it around whenever the studio has an availability. So that's kind of a con, especially if you're looking to get a project done. You only have a few days, and you want to work in a certain type of studio because they have certain type of gear and they're, geared toward this type of music or whatever, and having to work around that time can sometimes be cumbersome. Number 2, and probably the largest con to working in a pro studio, is the finances. Some studios can, be pretty pricey. They can range anywhere from $25 an hour to hundreds of dollars an hour, depending on what studio and what services you're getting. So the largest negative to recording in a pro studio is normally just the cost. If the cost wasn't a factor, a lot of people just wouldn't record in home studios. Why? When you can record in a pro studio with someone with 3 decades, 4 decades of experience behind the helm, making sure your song sounds amazing. Anyway, moving on. Pros and cons to your home studio. Number one, it's inexpensive. If cost is the biggest factor or the biggest con to a pro studio, then cost would be the biggest plus in a home studio. It is inexpensive. You wake up at 4 a.m. in your underwear and you want to record, go for it. It's just inexpensive. It's not costing you X amount of dollars an hour. You can record for as long as you want, whatever you want, at no cost to you. We'll get into kind of barrier to entry, but once you have your equipment, then there's no cost. Number two, you can record whenever you want. So number one is inexpensive. Number two, frequency. So with the pro studio, the con was I have to book and you only have Thursday at 7 a.m. available. If I want to use you, I'm stuck with that time. Where you're not stuck with that time if you have your own home studio, your own home gear. You can record whenever you want. You can just go in, hit the record. We're in my home studio now. I don't have to go to the big studio. I don't have to drive downtown. I just wake up, walk to my office, and I'm good to go. So it's just awesome. I really love having a home studio. And I still, even though I can mix and master some projects, I'll record them, I work on them for artists, and I'll dump them out somewhere else to go ahead and finish and polish it up. So number one, inexpensive. Two, you can record whenever you want. Number three, you can experiment. You can buy equipment, learn what it does, and experiment. And you can spend hours and hours and hours experimenting with sounds, experimenting with your voice, experimenting with knobs and compressors, and all of this really, really cool stuff that you really can't do in a pro studio. For one, they're normally not going to let you just, hey, I wonder what this does, and start turning knobs and unplugging and rewiring, repatching things. You normally won't have that type of freedom. And even if you do, you're paying by the hour or by the project. So you may not want to burn a lot of money playing around. You may just want the engineer to do what he does and you go in. Number four, you can stock the gear that you want. So maybe you go into the studio and you love the Telefunken 251, but this studio doesn't have it. If you can afford a Telefunken 251, great for those Christina Aguilera type vocals, right? Then you can buy it and you will always have the mic of your choice. So you can stock what works for you, what sounds good for you. And number five, it's yours. The studio is yours to do with whatever you want, to have whoever you want over, to play with it however you want. So five, and probably the biggest plus to a home studio, is that it's your studio. Now there are some cons. Number one con is space. It's a big plus for pro studios because the walls are treated, the vocal booths are treated, floors are treated. However, normally with a home studio, you may treat a little bit with Oralex and carpet and all of this really cool stuff to get a good sound, but most home recorders don't have 30 grand just to spend in treatment, not equipment, just in treatment, or $1 million to spend in designing an entire building around recording an orchestra or sound. So number one, con is space. Number two is the limiting of equipment choices. So yes, you can buy that Telefunken 251, but maybe you can't buy the Sony, or maybe you can't buy an LA2A, or maybe you can't buy an 1176. So you're limited on equipment, where you can go into a studio and have tons of equipment, tons of great equipment, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Normally that's not the case in your home studio. And number three, it's the location. You may not want everyone in your house. And I'm guilty of that too. Some people I'm allowed to come to my home to record. Some people I meet them in the studio. Number four, experience. Engineers in the pro studio have decades of experience. They grew up in the ranks. They grew up helping an engineer as an engineering assistant before they became an engineer. So they have their entire life of recording and mixing, where you may have your entire life doing some other field and you're dabbing in recording and mixing and mastering. So the biggest hindrance to a home studio is that you don't have the experience of a pro studio, which means it'll take you longer. More often, it'll take you longer to get to a sound that is considered radio ready or podcast stream ready. And number five, last but not least, the cost. Gear can be quite expensive. Now, gear normally appreciates, so you can buy it today, and normally years later you can sell it for the same cost, sometimes even more if you bought really good equipment. But costs, you have to buy a mic, you have to buy the cables, the wiring, the rack, the interface, the computer. So it can become very, very cost prohibitive. That is my pros and cons to a professional studio and a home studio. Hopefully that helps you make a decision on where to record your project. So the video is over, but before you leave, make sure to hop on over to johnnynomega.com and sign up for my free online course on the music business. As I said in the intro, the business part is really what makes superstars. Talent is great, but that's 30%. 70% is actually knowing the business. And I give all of the information away free in my online course at johnnynomega.com. So like, share, subscribe. And overall in life, don't just participate, dominate. Peace.